The recording starts mid-breath. Not at the beginning of a sentence, not at the beginning of a thought. Mid-breath, as though whoever made it had been talking for hours before they remembered to press record. The audio is damaged, 31 seconds of static, then a single voice, low and controlled, speaking in what the archivists would later identify as a dialect of Mandarin mixed with something they couldn't place. Then silence. Then, very quietly, the sound of something massive moving through water that shouldn't exist in open space. The hegemony's senior archivist, Eternal Recurving, listened to that recording 47 times before she filed her first report. Her report contained 3 words. Do not proceed. Nobody listened. The fleet numbered 812 vessels. This was not a war fleet exactly, though the distinction would prove meaningless. It was what the hegemony called an asterisk declaratory armada, a tradition stretching back 9,000 years, deployed whenever a new civilization achieved sufficient technological density to qualify as a galactic presence. The armada would enter the civilization's sovereign space, broadcast a standardized message of acknowledgement, catalog the civilization's military and industrial capacity, and establish the terms of integration. It had been done to the Vreth, to the Pale congregations, to the 17 Silent Singer hive clusters in the outer spiral. Not one of those civilizations had offered meaningful resistance because resistance was not the point. The point was presence. The point was scale. 812 ships entering your sky was not a threat. It was a geography lesson. It was the universe explaining to you how large it actually was. Fleet Sovereign Arak Methodical Descent had conducted 11 such declarations in his career. He had never lost a single crew member. He expected this one to be the same. The first thing that unsettled him was not a weapon. It was a smell. Fleet Sovereign Arak's command vessel, the Unyielding Premise, was sealed against external atmosphere, of course it was. But 3 hours after crossing the boundary the humans called the heliopause, something penetrated the filtration systems. Something organic, biological, warm in a way that had no technical definition. His environmental officer, Specialist Seth Narrow Calculation, spent 6 hours running diagnostics before she came to his command deck with an expression Arak had never seen on her face. It isn't a contaminant, she said. Then what is it? She paused in a way that was entirely unlike her. Seth was not someone who paused. It's a signal, Fleet Sovereign. The humans are broadcasting it, on every frequency simultaneously, including several we don't have words for. It's biological in origin, but it has been engineered, modified, made deliberate. Arak waited. It smells, Seth said carefully, like a warning, but our xenochemists cannot agree on who it's warning. That was the first mystery, and Arak filed it and moved forward because 812 ships do not stop for a smell. The second unsettling thing was the silence. Standard declaratory protocol required the target civilization to respond to initial broadcast within 12 hours. Humans had been observing hegemony communications for decades. They had demonstrated translation capability. They understood the protocol. And yet, as the Armada crossed the distance that humans measured in something they called astronomical units, there was nothing. No response, no acknowledgement, no counter-broadcast. But there was activity. The deep-range sensors showed it clearly. Humans were moving. Thousands of vessels, small and fast, repositioning across the inner system in patterns, the tactical AI rated as statistically significant but structurally incoherent. The patterns did not resemble defensive formations. They did not resemble evacuation routes. They resembled nothing in the hegemony's 19,000 years of accumulated military doctrine. What are they doing? Arak asked. His tactical officer, Commander Velsharp Inevitability, stared at the display for a long time. Forming groups, he said finally. Small groups geographically distributed, each one anchored to something. A planet, a station, a debris field. each group positioned to observe every other group. Mutual observation, not combat positioning. That's what it looks like, Fleet Sovereign. Eric thought about this. They're watching each other, not us. Vel had no answer for that, and that was the second mystery. The third came 48 hours later, in the form of a number. Hegemony intelligence on humanity was extensive. They had been observing for 60 years, cataloging population figures, industrial output, military vessel tonnage, political structures. Humans numbered 34 billion across 7 inhabited worlds and countless orbital installations. Their military capacity was modest by hegemony standards, enough to defend against local threats, not enough to meaningfully contest a declaratory armada. This was known, this was certain. So the number that Fleet Sovereign Arak received at hour 51 made no immediate sense. His intelligence analyst, a young officer named Pret Curious Margin, brought it to him with shaking hands. Literally shaking, Pret was a species whose emotional states expressed through involuntary extremity vibration, and he was vibrating quite severely. Our long-range biological census is returning anomalous data, Pret said. Anomalous how? Human population readings do not match our records. We're getting, Fleet Sovereign, we're detecting signatures consistent with human biological activity from locations that are not on any of our charts. Not colonies, not stations, locations that should be empty space. Arak went very still. How many locations? Pret looked at his data. Thousands, spread across a volume of space that would take us 11 years to traverse. Arak sat with that for a long moment. 812 ships, moving through a region of space they believed they understood completely. And somewhere, in 11 years' worth of empty space in every direction, humans were already there. The question was not where they had gone. The question was asterisk when they had left. The armada continued. Arak was not a man who turned back, and besides, there was still a rational explanation. There was always a rational explanation. The readings were sensor artifacts. The humans had hidden colony ships in the outer system, and the hegemony's long-range observation had simply missed them. 60 years of surveillance with a blind spot. It happened. It was embarrassing, but it happened. He broadcast again. Standard declaration, full spectrum, the recorded voice of the hegemony prime speaking 19,000 years of civilization into the void. This time the humans answered. Not with words, not with a counter-broadcast, with a single vessel, tiny, barely 100 meters, unshielded, unarmed by any reading his sensors could produce, that simply appeared in the space between his armada and the inner system, appeared without a drive signature, without transition radiation, without any indication of where it had come from. It sat there, waiting. "Hail them," Arak said. The response came in 17 languages simultaneously. The hegemony translation systems parsed it in 3 seconds. It was a single sentence, delivered in the same 17 languages, all meaning exactly the same thing. "You are speaking to the wrong people." "Then who," Arak asked the empty air, "should I be speaking to?" The vessel didn't answer. It simply turned and accelerated toward a specific set of coordinates. Not a planet, not a station, but a point in empty space, at a speed his sensors recorded and then immediately flagged as physically impossible for a vessel its size. He followed, because what else do you do with 812 ships and 19,000 years of civilization at your back? What else do you do? The coordinates resolved into a structure. Not a ship, not a station exactly, though it had the mass of a small moon and the energy output of something Arak's engineers would spend the next several days arguing about in increasingly distressed tones. It was built the way humans seem to build everything, which was to say, without apparent regard for any architectural principle the hegemony recognized. It grew, it jutted, it contradicted itself structurally. It looked, Arak's cultural attaché told him slowly, like something that had started as one thing and become 20 different things, each addition made by someone who had different intentions than the person before, and none of it had ever been torn down. "It's a parliament," the attaché said, "or it was. It might be something else now." "How old is it?" She ran the analysis, ran it again, looked at Arak with an expression she clearly didn't know how to organize. "The outer sections are 11 years old. The innermost sections are, our instruments cannot reliably date them. They're beyond our instrument range." Arak absorbed this. 11 years ago, the hegemony had first confirmed humanity's FTL capability. 11 years ago, humanity had apparently built the outer sections of this structure, which meant they had known, 11 years ago, that the Armada was coming, which meant the entire 60 years of hegemony observation had been something. He didn't have a word for what it had been, but it wasn't surveillance. It wasn't anything as simple as surveillance. "Connect me," he said. "Whatever's in there, connect me." The voice that came through the channel was not what he expected. It was a woman's voice, human female, middle-aged by biological markers, speaking in a language the translation system handled without difficulty. She was not a general. The title in her identification packet was something that translated approximately as * Senior Archivist *. Her name was Dr. Chen Meilin. "Fleet Sovereign Arak Methodical Descent," she said, not as a greeting, not as a question, but as a plain statement of fact. "You received my recording." Arak went completely still. "The one from 31 years ago," she continued. "With the static. We weren't sure the damage was survivable, but we had to make it look accidental. You've been listening to it for months." He had been listening to it. His archivist, Voss, had flagged it as a standard first contact precursor document, origin unknown, and he had reviewed it as part of his standard mission preparation. He had thought nothing of it. "You put it in our archives," he said, "not a question." "We put a lot of things in a lot of places," Dr. Chen said. "Fleet Sovereign, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. How many of your vessels right now are reading their proximity sensors as clear?" He checked. A reflex, the question made no sense. They were in open space. "Of course the proximity sensors were all of them," he said. "And how many of your crew members are currently in their duty stations?" "All of them. This is a standard active declaration. Everyone is at." He stopped, because he had just noticed something impossible. His own proximity sensors, the ones on his * vessel, were showing clear, but his external visual feeds were not showing clear. His external visual feeds were showing something. At the extreme edge of visual resolution, objects, thousands of objects, perfectly stationary, surrounding the Armada on every side. His sensors could not see them, his eyes could. "Dr. Chen," he said, and his voice was a remarkable performance of calm. "How long have those been there?" "Since you crossed the heliopause," she said. "About 72 hours. And you have spoofed my sensor systems for 72 hours. We have spoofed every sensor system in your Armada for 72 hours, yes. Fleet Sovereign, I want to be very clear. This is not a demonstration of military capability. We are not threatening you. We are giving you information that your superiors chose not to give you before they sent you here." He stared at the visual feed, at the thousands of objects that his instruments said were not there. "What information?" he asked. She said it simply, the way you say something you have practiced saying 1,000 times to make sure it doesn't sound like what it is. "The last fleet the hegemony sent here was not the first." The silence that followed was not comfortable. It was the silence of a man reconstituting his entire understanding of his situation, while trying not to let anyone in the room see him do it. Fleet Sovereign Arak Methodical Descent had been told explicitly, clearly, in a formal briefing document signed by 3 Hegemony Council members, that this was a first declaration. Humanity's first contact with hegemony authority. A maiden approach. When he managed. The first fleet arrived 112 years ago, Dr. Chen said. Before our FTL capability, before we were officially on your charts. You classified us as pre-contact, which technically meant we weren't covered by your standard diplomatic protocols. The fleet was smaller, about 230 vessels. They came to take an inventory, resources, population, habitability assessments. Standard procedure for a pre-contact species, I'm told. What happened to them? The pause this time was not Dr. Chen organizing her thoughts. It was something else. Something that felt, even across the translation buffer, distinctly human. Nothing, she said. Nothing happened to them. They took their inventory, they left. And then they came back 20 years later with their assessments, and they had a conversation with some people who were not the governments of Earth. People who were further along, in terms of their planning. Arak looked at his external visual feeds, at the objects that shouldn't exist. The people in those locations, he said slowly, the ones Pret's census detected, in the empty space. Some of them, yes. They've been there for 90 years. Some of them longer. He thought about the smell, the biological signal on every frequency. The warning that the xenochemists couldn't decide was directed at his fleet or at something else entirely. Who were you warning? He asked. The signal, the biological broadcast, it wasn't directed at us. Dr. Chen was quiet for 3 full seconds. No, she said, it wasn't. Then who? Fleet Sovereign. Her voice shifted in a way the translation system couldn't fully process, something underneath the words, a frequency that wasn't language but was absolutely communication. There are things in this galaxy that are afraid of humans, not because of our ships or our weapons or our political organization, because of what we are willing to do. We have been sending that signal for 60 years to make sure those things stay far enough away, that you are not caught in the middle of something you did not come here to participate in. Arak did not ask what those things were. He discovered, examining himself carefully, that he did not want to know. The Hegemony Council, he said instead, they know about the First Fleet. Of course they do. They sent me here anyway, without telling me. Yes. He sat with that, with the compound weight of it, 812 ships, 11 declarations. He had never lost a crew member. What do you want? He asked. I want to show you something, Dr. Chen said. Before you make any decisions, I want you to see what you actually came here to do. She sent a file, compressed, encrypted with a hegemony encryption protocol that should not have been accessible to any human system, and yet here it was, sitting in his secure archive, already decrypted. He read it twice. Then he called Commander Vel to his private chamber, and he handed him the file, and he waited. Vel read it once. His species did not have the involuntary vibration that Pret Curious Margin had, but he went very, very still in a way that communicated the same thing. This is the integration assessment, Vel said. Yes. For a fleet sovereign, this is the integration assessment for humanity. Yes. This is, Vel stopped. They weren't going to integrate them. No. Integration was the word the hegemony used for the process by which new civilizations entered the galactic community. It was a word Arak had used for 11 declarations. It was a word that had always, in his career, meant what it said. Vel looked at the file again, at the projected timeline, at the resource allocation charts, at the population management schedules using language Arak now understood he had trained himself not to read too closely. The other pre-contact assessments, Vel said, the ones before FTL, they weren't inventory assessments. No. They were selection criteria. Yes. Vel set the file down. How did they get this? Arak was quiet for a moment. Then, I don't think they got it, he said. I think they let us think they didn't have it. I think they've had it for 90 years. And I think every decision they've made since then," he gestured at the external visual feed, at the thousands of invisible objects, at the distributed formations of small vessels watching each other, at the signal on every frequency, at the recording in his archive from 31 years ago that a woman who was very much alive had already told him she made. "Every decision," he said, "was made by people who knew exactly what we were coming here to do." He went back to the channel, Dr. Chen. "Fleet Sovereign. The humans who have been in deep space for 90 years, the ones at the coordinates that don't exist, are they still?" "They're fine," she said, and there was something in the word *fine that he understood was a specifically human construction. A word that technically meant *acceptable, but which humans deployed to mean approximately 40 different things depending on context, and in this context meant something more like, "That question has an answer you're not ready for yet, so I'm giving you the small version." "They volunteered," he said. "It was not a question. Every one of them. To spend 90 years in empty space, waiting, in case an armada came. In case multiple armadas came," she said. "We planned for several scenarios. This one is actually another pause. This one is going relatively well." Eric stared at the visual feed, at the objects that surrounded him on every side, that his sensors could not see, that had been there for 72 hours while his crew ran their standard declaration protocols with complete confidence. "Dr. Chen," he said, "those vessels surrounding my fleet, how many of them are crewed?" "All of them. And if I had proceeded, if I had entered the inner system and begun, the process that the integration assessment describes." "Silence. Dr. Chen." "You would not have completed it," she said simply. "They would have destroyed my fleet." "Some would have, yes, but Fleet Sovereign," and here her voice did something the translation system rendered as *weight, as *depth*, as something that had been carried for a very long time. "That was never the part we were worried about." "Then what were you worried about?" "We were worried that you would complete it and come back," she said. "We were worried that the hegemony would look at the cost and decide it was acceptable. We were worried you would send another 800 ships, and then another, and that eventually you would factor in our response capability and simply bring enough ships that the math worked out in your favor." Eric understood math. He understood it extremely well. "So the display," he said, "the spoofed sensors, showing me you can hide inside my own instruments, the biological signal that has been running for 60 years, the people in empty space, the file you shouldn't have, the recording from 31 years ago. None of this is a military demonstration. No, it's a psychological one. We prefer informational *, Dr. Chen said. "We wanted to make sure that whoever the hegemony sent understood the actual cost, not the military cost, not the cost in ships and crew, the other cost." He waited. "The cost," she said, "of fighting a civilization that has been preparing for this conversation for 112 years. That put people in deep space for 90 years voluntarily. That built response capacity in locations that don't appear on any chart. That has been sending a biological warning signal to things the hegemony does not know about and would not like to meet. That has access to your most secure archives. A beat. That has been, Fleet Sovereign, very patiently, very quietly, making itself into something that it would cost more to destroy than to leave alone." The room was silent. Arak looked at his command display, at 812 vessels, at 11 successful declarations, at a career built on the confidence that scale was its own argument. "The one ship," he said, "the one that came back from the first armada." She said nothing, and somehow her silence told him more than anything she had said out loud. "There was an armada before the one 112 years ago," he said. "There was an earlier one. The hegemony sent a fleet before the pre-contact assessment, before any of this, and only one ship came back. Still she said nothing. Dr. Chen, how many armadas has the hegemony sent to human space? When she spoke, her voice was careful and precise, the way you speak when you are being very exact because the precision is itself the message. Fleet Sovereign, why don't you ask your council? He did. It took 11 hours to get through secure channels. 11 hours during which Eric sat in his command chair and did not sleep and did not ask for food and simply looked at his external visual feeds and at the surrounding objects, patient and still, as his crew quietly did their duties and tried not to look at the feeds themselves. The council response came from a single member, not the prime, a mid-tier administrator whose name Eric had seen in bureaucratic documents but whose face he had never encountered in his career. She delivered the answer in a flat tone that he recognized, after some reflection, as fear that had been rehearsed into composure. 3 armadas, his was the 4th. The first had been 5 ships 300 years ago, when humanity was pre-industrial, pre-spaceflight, pre-everything. A survey mission that should have been trivial. 1 ship came back. The second armada 200 years ago, 12 vessels returning to understand what had happened to the first, better equipped, more prepared. 1 ship came back. The third 112 years ago, 230 ships, with the confidence that scale would resolve what skill had not. That fleet had come back, all of it, intact, with the pre-contact assessment and the integration timeline and the selection criteria. The council had celebrated. Eric had not understood, until this moment, sitting in the silence of his command chamber, what it meant that the third armada had come back whole, and the previous 2 had each returned a single ship. It meant the first 2 had been stopped, by a pre-FTL civilization, by humans who could not yet leave their own solar system. And the third had been allowed to leave. He sat with this realization for a long time, with the specific weight of understanding that the Third Fleet's success had not been a military outcome. It had been a gift, an invitation, a deliberate choice by people who had been building something for a very long time and who had decided that the hegemony having the integration assessment, having the selection criteria, the resource projections, the population management schedules, was more useful than the hegemony not having it. Because people who know they are on a list behave differently than people who don't. And people who know that the civilization writing the list has 300 years of patience and 100,000 volunteers in deep space and biological signals, aimed at things the list writers don't understand. He opened the channel. Dr. Chen. Fleet Sovereign. The first 2 armadas, the ones where only 1 ship came back, he breathed carefully. What happened to them? She was quiet. He had expected more silence, the deep human silence she used when she was deciding how much to give him. But she answered quickly this time, and that quickness was its own kind of information. They were given a choice, she said. The same choice we gave the Third Fleet and the same choice we're giving you. They chose differently. What was the choice? Leave, she said, and take a message back or stay. He thought of 1 ship, a single crew, crossing the enormous cold distance between human space and hegemony territory with a message that the council had then classified for 300 years. What was the message? The same one we're giving you now, in the same format. The warmth in her voice when she said this was not warmth exactly. It was something humans apparently felt when they had waited a very long time for a moment and the moment had arrived. We are not asking you to love us, Fleet Sovereign. We are not asking you to fear us, though you probably should. We are asking you to understand one thing clearly. Tell me. We will not stop, she said. That's the message. 300 years ago, 112 years ago today, the message is the same. Whatever you send, we will not stop. We will lose people. We have already lost people you will never know about in places you will never find. We have been losing people quietly and voluntarily for 300 years, and every single one of them chose it. That is the thing you cannot model. That is the thing that does not appear in the integration assessment. You can calculate our ships and our weapons and our population and our industrial capacity, and every calculation will tell you the same thing: you can win. You probably can. The math is not in our favor. She paused. But you cannot calculate what it will cost you to keep winning, because we will not stop. And you, Fleet Sovereign, your civilization is very old and very large and very powerful, but you have things to lose, things you care about preserving. She let that sit. We are not the strongest species in the galaxy. She said, I know that, you know that. Everyone knows that, but we are the only species in this galaxy that you cannot exhaust. Arak methodical descent, Fleet Sovereign of the hegemony, conductor of 11 successful declarations, a man who had moved through his career with the steady confidence of a civilization that had never truly met its limit, sat in his chair and looked at his visual feeds. 812 ships. Thousands of silent objects, patient and still, crewed by people who had been waiting for this exact moment, some of them for their entire adult lives. And somewhere in the structure beside him, a woman who had been speaking to him with the practiced ease of someone delivering a speech she had spent 30 years writing. He thought of the people in deep space, in the coordinates that didn't exist. 90 years. The stars would have changed around them. Their families would have changed. Their world would have changed. They had watched it change through whatever small window of communication the plan had allowed them, because they had agreed to be somewhere important could not be reached, and that agreement had been made freely, without coercion, and then honored with a thoroughness that the word *honor barely contained. Dr. Chen, he said, what do you want from me? The same thing we've wanted from every armada, she said. Go home. Tell the council what you saw. Tell them exactly what we showed you and exactly what we said. Tell them we are willing to negotiate on our terms at a time of our choosing as equals. A breath. And tell them that the next fleet they send, if they send one, should know that we have been watching them prepare it for as long as they've been watching us. He looked at his display, at the communications log, at the secure channel to the council that had taken 11 hours to produce a 300-year-old classified document and a bureaucrat's carefully rehearsed terror. They won't believe me, he said. Some of them will, she said. The ones who have read the messages from the first 2 armadas and spent 300 years trying to decide what to do about them. They've been arguing about it for a very long time, Fleet Sovereign. You going home with this conversation gives them an argument they can actually finish. He stood up from his command chair. It was an involuntary thing. His body deciding the geometry of the moment required it, because sitting felt suddenly like a posture he had no right to. The one ship, he said, the ones that came back from the first 2 armadas, their crews, what happened to them? They lived, Dr. Chen said. Long lives, we made sure of that. He stopped. You had contact with them after they returned. We've had contact with every crew member of every ship the hegemony has ever sent to our space, she said. Fleet Sovereign, we have had contact with you for a very long time. That's not a threat. It's just context. We want you to understand the scale of our attention. He thought of the recording. Mid-breath. 31 seconds of static, a voice speaking a language the archivists had never quite identified, and then the sound of something massive moving through water in open space. He thought of Voss, his archivist, who had listened to it 47 times and written 3 words. Do not proceed. Dr. Chen, he said, my archivist, Voss eternal recurving, did she know? The pause was different this time, smaller, human. Tell her, Dr. Chen said softly, that we hope the roses are still growing. The armada left. All 812 ships, in the same formation they had arrived in, moving with the same measured deliberation that the hegemony brought to everything, steady, organized, the way a civilization moves when it has the luxury of moving slowly. It took them 6 weeks to cross back to the heliopause. 6 weeks during which Arak wrote his report and rewrote it, and understood with increasing clarity that the act of writing the truth was itself a kind of courage he had not previously been asked to exercise. He submitted it unredacted. He listed every encounter, every anomaly, the spoofed sensors, the biological signal, the census readings from coordinates that didn't exist, the file that had appeared in his encrypted archive, the conversation with a woman who had made a recording 31 years ago and planted it where the right person would find it, the 3 prior armadas, the message that had not changed in 3 centuries. He listed all of it, and at the end, he wrote one additional thing, something that had not been in any of his briefings, that he could not source to any document or data point, that was simply the product of 6 weeks of sitting with what he had seen and what it meant. The humans are not building towards something, he wrote. They have already built it. What we observed was not preparation. It was invitation. They have been ready for this conversation for longer than some of our current council members have been alive, and they allowed us to arrive, and they gave us everything we needed to make a different decision than our predecessors. This is the 3rd time they have done this. There is a specific word in human language. I asked the translation system for the nearest hegemony equivalent and it returned no result, so I will render it phonetically, patient, not as a behavioral description, as an identity. They are not a patient civilization. They are patience itself, organized and breathing and impossible to exhaust. I recommend we talk to them. I recommend we hurry. Arak methodical descent never conducted another declaration. He became, instead, the hegemony's first formal ambassador to humanity, a post that had not previously existed, because the hegemony did not historically create ambassador roles for civilizations it intended to integrate. The creation of the role was itself a document, a statement written in institutional structure rather than language. The council took 11 months to negotiate the terms of his appointment, because some of them were still arguing. Some of them had been arguing for 300 years and had developed a kind of momentum that was difficult to interrupt. Dr. Chen Meilin waited. 34 billion humans waited, going about their lives on 7 worlds and countless stations, and in coordinates that didn't appear on any chart, patient in a way that had long since ceased to be effort and become simply the texture of what they were. Voss Eternal Recurving resigned her position as Fleet Archivist the same day Arak's appointment was announced. She took a posting at the hegemony's only cultural research center that focused exclusively on human material. On her desk, in a small container with a recycled light panel, she grew 3 small plants with red flowers that had no name in her language, but that the research center's human consultant, when she first saw them, identified immediately and with an expression that was not surprise but recognition. The consultant looked at Voss for a long time. "You're the archivist," the consultant said, "the one who wrote the report." "I wrote 3 words," Voss said. "I should have written more." 3 was enough, the consultant said. "Dr. Chen read your report 47 times. She smiled, and it was the human smile that Voss had been studying for years and still could not fully decode, the one that contained multiple things simultaneously, things that in hegemony emotional architecture would not have been able to coexist, joy and sadness and something that was neither. She said it was the most useful document the hegemony ever produced. Voss looked at her roses, at the small red certainty of them. "She was waiting for the right person," Voss said slowly. "All this time, all the planning and the signals and the vessels in deep space and the people in empty coordinates, all of it, she was waiting for someone who would read the recording and know." Yes, and she had planned for the possibility that no such person would come. She had planned for most possibilities, the consultant agreed. She has been planning for a very long time. Voss was quiet for a moment. Outside the window of her small office, The hegemony's capital spread in every direction, ancient and enormous, the careful geometry of a civilization that had organized itself around the assumption that organization was its own protection. What would she have done, Voss asked, if the Armada had proceeded, if we had done what the assessment described? The consultant was quiet for a long time, long enough that Voss turned from the window to look at her. And the consultant said, in a voice that was very calm and very simple, and carried in it something that Voss's translation systems processed as, the answer to this question has been ready for 300 years, and nobody has ever wanted to hear it. Exactly what we told you we would do. The galaxy is very large. It has room in its enormous patience for most things. What it does not have room for, what no mapping system, no integration assessment, no 19,000-year military doctrine has ever successfully accounted for, is a species that looked at the longest odds in its history and decided the correct response was to start building. Quietly, carefully, in the coordinates nobody would think to check. With volunteers who understood they might wait their entire lives for a moment that might never come, and who chose that life with a clarity that the hegemony's xenopsychologists would later classify as the single most alien behavior they had ever documented. Not because it was incomprehensible, because they comprehended it perfectly and still could not imagine doing it themselves. 812 ships had entered human space without fear. One of them would have come back exactly one as always, because that was how humans had always done it. One ship, one crew, one message, the same message, unchanged across 300 years of waiting, but it didn't need to. Because this time the right person had been listening. This time the archivist had written 3 words and a fleet sovereign had been paying attention. This time the humans decided that was enough. Out in the coordinates that don't appear on any chart, in the empty space between the stars, the volunteers received a single transmission. No explanation, just a date and a code word that meant, come home. Some of them had been waiting 90 years to hear it. They came home. And the galaxy, which had believed for 19,000 years that it understood the shape of power, quietly and permanently revised its understanding. Not because humanity had won, not because humanity had demonstrated superiority, but because humanity had done something that victory and superiority had never required. They had simply refused to stop being human, in all the terrible, irrational, patient, loving, calculating, sacrificial depth that the word contained, until the universe ran out of reasons to keep asking them to be something else. The hegemony's integration assessment was never formally voided. It was simply never acted upon. It sat in a classified archive, thoroughly read and thoroughly understood and thoroughly not implemented, a document that had functioned in the end as the most expensive lesson in hegemony history. That the most dangerous thing in the galaxy is not a civilization with better weapons. It is a civilization that has already decided what it is willing to lose, and has made that decision so completely, so irreversibly, so far in advance, that by the time you are in a position to test it,